So something that I thought would be interesting to talk about today would be some of the emerging technologies and other things that have come up that are really interesting in the space related to electric cars, and some of the things that are happening with batteries and battery health and how we charge cars and all of that stuff. So I thought I'd spend a few minutes today and talk about some interesting articles that have come up in the last couple of months. I do this periodically, where we talk about some things that, kind of change the industry to a large degree. You see the industry continuing to evolve. We're starting to see more cars in the marketplace. We're starting to see more charging stations. We're starting to see more acceptance of what the charging ability will be, what the EV market will look like. California has already mandated that all cars have to be non-ICE cars of some kind by sometime in the late 2020s. I don't remember the exact date. And New York is probably going to pass the law that cars have to be that way by 2035. So it changes the industry to a large degree when these things come up. And you have to start thinking about cars differently. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, we're going to continue to produce these cars. And then you look at GM telling its dealers, hey, if you don't want to sell EV cars, get out of the business. And Ford saying, you know what, we're just going to be service centers. And yeah, we've got a problem with the price of our F-150 right now, but we'll get that fixed. We have a lot of cars sitting in the factory, in the lot behind the factory that we can't get the chips for that we need. But as soon as we get those chips, the price will have to come down because we'll have more cars in the market. We'll be able to sell them for the market value instead of for the markup that the dealerships do. And, they're continuing to negotiate with the dealerships to get them to bring those car prices down and make them better under control. So it's really interesting. All of these things are kind of coming together in sort of this sequence of events. And, the market is getting easier to get electric cars into. Even in my last video, when I talked about electric cars, I missed 3, 4, 5 cars that are just getting into the market, or they're just announcing and they're planning to put out later this year or early next year. And they just come along and they've been working on them for a long time, but they don't talk about them. Then suddenly they go, oh yeah, we're going to release this car. And you go, what? Where did that come from? Because you don't always know about these things, which is exactly the point. For a while there, when Tesla came out, it was like, wow, this is really exciting. And then everybody would kind of talk about their car as the next great thing that they were going to have, but you didn't see it. You would hear about it and then suddenly it would come up. Now you're hearing about these cars that just came up and they don't do any hype around them. They just show up in the marketplace and you go, things are changing. The whole marketplace is changing. How many ICE cars do you hear about other than the hype around an ICE car? How many new ICE cars do you hear about generally when they talk about a new car line that's coming until they're ready to announce it and they've already started production on it? Oh, here's the 2022 blah, blah, blah. And here's what the car looks like. It's really amazing and remarkable to me. So that's where the whole industry is starting to change at this point. So anyway, let's talk about some of these other articles and emerging technologies and different things, and we'll see where we can go from there.
I'd like to take a moment and talk about Hurricane Ian and the fact that it caused a lot of storm surge, and storm surge tends to flood cars. There were a number of cars that wound up underwater on Southwest Florida's coast, including some electric vehicles. So this is a potential problem. And we also know that salt water can damage lithium-ion batteries. It can actually corrode them, and they can actually combust in some cases. Now, the problem is here that they're fairly well contained the way they're inside the cars. And second, there was only anecdotal evidence that this happened, but nevertheless, the news media picked up on this, and electric vehicle fires have burned down homes after Hurricane Ian's saltwater damage. And what happened was, there was a little bit more to this story. This is a very politically motivated story. I'm not saying this couldn't happen, but the only evidence we had of any sort of fire was this car that actually caught fire when it was on the road. We don't know what the cause was. We don't know what else happened. We only see this video, and the person who's tweeting about it is an elected official in the state of Florida. And of course, they went back to the federal government and saying, what are we doing about this, and yada, yada, yada. And so that reminds us that we should always be looking at EV myths and the fact that there's a lot of things out there that make the news that aren't necessarily accurate. And that's part of the problem we have to deal with here. It's unlikely that there were actually batteries that spontaneously combusted. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's unlikely, and no one can provide any proof or evidence about it. So the UK government is actually starting to go after some of these sort of myths and starting to talk about things in a different perspective. And I think that's the thing we need to do here in this country as well, is start to talk about the myths and do a better job of disseminating good information. Some time ago on a previous video, I talked about Purdue University working on some sort of cooling technology to make charging faster. And what I didn't know was that this was a result of some of the space program and some of the things that they've been working on. So it's actually kind of cooler and deeper and more interesting than I knew. Also, I learned that Hertz is teaming up with BP to install more charging stations, which is really exciting news because we'll see more charging happening. There's now wireless charging that's starting to come up, which I think is amazingly cool. This is all done through linear induction and magnets, and if we can crack this nut, the charging problem becomes much easier to solve because we can charge much faster and in different ways. And speaking of charging, Siemens has come up with something that you can install at your meter at home that allows you to hook up to charging directly without having to work on your panel, which I think is a huge improvement, and it's consumer friendly that you can install it yourself. There was a story about the first battery-powered aircraft that was able to successfully complete a flight. That's another piece of remarkable technology, how you can reuse this and make it even better. Airless tires have come up again in the news. Some people say airless tires aren't as comfortable to drive on, there's still some work to be done, but continue to think about all these companies that could get into the airless tire business and do a whole lot more with it if they really put some time and attention into it. I mentioned something in a previous video about Apple's CarPlay taking over some systems, and that's coming up in the news again. The car companies are all running scared because they're car companies first, software companies second, and Apple is a software company first and thinks they can help you. So it's been said that EV adoption is going on around the world, and every time you reach that 5% adoption rate, you're well on your way to electric adoption. And the US will probably reach 25% of all cars being electric by 2025. That's pretty remarkable. And if we look at the adoption rates overall, the number of EV sales and the percentage of cars that are out there, you can see that there's a lot of countries that are ahead of the United States. But the United States is starting to catch up in terms of the number of total EV sales that are going out there. And it's pretty remarkable that we'll finally get to a point where it feels like we're actually moving on having more cars in the marketplace.
So in my opinion, a lot of cool stuff happening, a lot of interesting things coming out in the marketplace. I mean, from these EV stations to how you charge at home to even the airless tires and that sort of technology that's evolving. Those things are just really, really interesting, and I think they make the EV market that much better in the long run. And I think the market is going to continue to grow. By the time the end of my warranty period, I think I'm going to have a fair number of options available to me as a car goes. Or maybe I hang on to it for another 6 months, regardless, and don't even think twice about it and see where it goes from there, because I think there'll be even more options available at the end of next year, a year from now. So we'll see where it goes, but just wanted to share with you. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, just post them below, and I'm always happy to try and engage. Thanks very much. Have a great day.